The cold did not warn him. It never did. One moment the world was quiet, the next it was trying to kill him. The wind rose suddenly, screaming through the pine trees like something alive. Snow followed right behind it, thick and sharp, cutting at his face. Any man caught outside in this kind of storm would be dead in less than an hour, and he knew it. He lay inside a rough log shelter deep in the Rocky Mountains. Sometime in the 1830s. Outside, the temperature had dropped far below zero. Inside, it hovered just at freezing. That small difference meant everything. It meant life instead of death. The shelter around him was not comfortable, not pretty, and not forgiving, but it was brilliant. The man was a mountain trapper, one of thousands who came west chasing beaver pelts. These men were not chasing adventure for fun. Beaver fur meant money. A single good season could earn more than years of factory work back east. But the mountains demanded payment first, and that payment was knowledge. Winter in the Rockies did not care how strong a man was. It did not care how brave he felt. It only cared whether he was prepared. Many were not. Their bones were still scattered across valleys and slopes, silent lessons for those who came after. This man had learned from survivors. Men like Samuel Mackenzie, a veteran trapper who had lived through nearly 20 winters. Sam used to say, "One rule above all others. If the fire dies, you die." That rule echoed in the man's head as he listened to the blizzard hammering his shelter. He lay on a raised wooden platform covered in buffalo robes. The ground below was frozen solid, a thief that would steal body heat in minutes. The platform kept him just high enough to catch rising warm air from the fire, but not so high that he would sweat. Even sleeping had rules in the mountains. The stone fireplace glowed weakly. The fire was burning low. Too low, he pushed himself upright, careful and slow. Wasting energy could be deadly. He slipped his feet into fur-lined moccasins, placed exactly where they needed to be. Bare feet on frozen dirt could cripple a man before he reached the fire. The shelter was small, barely enough room to stand. Thick logs formed the walls, each carefully chosen months earlier. Not green wood, which would shrink and leave gaps. Not brittle dry wood, which would crack. Each log fit tight against the next, sealed with clay, mixed with grass and animal hair. Tiny air pockets trapped warmth, just like modern insulation, though no one called it that back then. He added a small log to the fire, not too big. Too much wood could smother the coals. Not too small either. This was not guesswork. It was skill learned through watching men freeze to death while doing it wrong. As the fire caught, heat slowly pushed back against the cold. His fingers burned with returning feeling. He flexed them carefully. Even warmth could hurt if rushed. The shelter itself was not built for comfort. It was built as a survival machine. Every choice mattered, starting with where it stood. Long before winter came, he had chosen this spot carefully. Not in the valley where cold air pooled. Not on a ridge where wind could tear a roof apart. He built on the southeast side of a hill, protected from the worst winter winds that came from the northwest. Trees and rock formations broke the wind before it reached the shelter. That alone saved huge amounts of firewood. Wind could kill faster than cold. A calm -30 could be survived. -10 with heavy wind could not. The roof sloped at a precise angle. Too flattened snow would pile up until it collapsed. Too steep and the wind would rip it apart. Mountain men learned that angle through trial and error, often fatal error. Snow slid off just fast enough, carrying danger away instead of piling it on top. Outside, the blizzard howled. The sound pressed against the logs, testing them. Snow packed itself against the walls, sealing cracks and adding another layer of protection. Snow was dangerous, but it was also useful. Packed snow blocked wind and held heat inside. The mountains offered no mercy, but they did offer tools. Inside, the shelter was dark, except for the firelight. Shadows moved along the walls. The man listened carefully. A crack outside made his muscles tense. Wolves, maybe, or just a tree branch snapping under snow. In the mountains, fear never fully slept. He stayed still, conserving strength. Panic wasted energy. Calm kept men alive. He thought of the many who failed to learn that lesson. Men who tried to outrun storms, men who built shelters too big to heat. Men who chose beauty over safety. Hours passed slowly. The fire was fed again, always small, always controlled. The stone fireplace absorbed heat during the burn and released it slowly afterward. The stones were not chosen at random. Some rocks held heat well, others did not. Mountain men knew the difference by touch and experience, long before science gave it names. By morning, the storm would pass or it would not. The mountain decided that. All he could do was trust the shelter, the fire, and the knowledge paid for by generations before him. The wind screamed again, but inside the shelter, he was still alive. And in the Rockies, that meant the system worked. Morning came without warmth. The blizzard had passed, but the cold stayed behind like a warning. Pale light pushed through a small opening in the wall, a window covered with oiled animal skin. It let light in, but kept the wind out. The shelter was quiet now, almost peaceful, but quiet in the mountains could still be deadly. The man rose slowly from the sleeping platform. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but it was still alive. That mattered. He knelt and fed it carefully, coaxing flame back into the room. Soon the stone hearth began to breathe out warmth again, slow and steady. He took a moment to listen. No wind hammering the walls. No cracking trees nearby. Just silence and the soft pop of firewood. That meant it was time to work. A mountain man never rested just because a storm ended. Storms were followed by problems. He pulled on his buckskin shirt and heavy coat. Before opening the door, he checked the walls with his hands. Tiny drafts could hide anywhere. One small gap could grow into a deadly tunnel for cold air. He found a weak spot near the corner, barely noticeable. He pressed fresh clay and dried grass into it, smoothing it tight. The shelter had to breathe, but only in the right places. He opened the door and stepped outside. The cold hit him hard, sharp enough to steal breath. Snow covered everything, smooth and bright under the morning sun. Drifts reached halfway up the walls. The roof, angled just right, had shed most of its load. That decision alone might have saved his life. He circled the shelter slowly, eyes trained on the roof and walls. This inspection was routine, but never casual. He looked for sagging logs, loose stones, signs of moisture. Water was more dangerous than cold. Wet clothing or bedding meant hypothermia, no matter how strong the fire burned. At the back of the shelter, he found it. A small dark patch where snowmelt had seeped through overnight. Not enough to soak through yet, but enough to warn him. He grabbed his ladder and climbed carefully, boots biting into packed snow. Up close, the problem was clear. Wind had shifted a section of roof covering, opening a narrow gap. He worked quickly. In this cold, hands could fail in minutes. He pressed the material back into place and sealed it with fresh chinking. The mixture stiffened fast in the cold air, locking itself into the gap. He climbed down and returned inside, shutting the door tight. Warmth wrapped around him again, almost gentle. He hung his coat near the fire to dry. Rapid changes in temperature could hurt too, so he moved slow, controlled. With the shelter secure for now, his thoughts turned to firewood. The storm had trapped him inside for days. His supply was low. Without wood, the shelter meant nothing. He strapped on snowshoes and stepped back outside. Each step was deliberate. Snow hid dangers. A twisted ankle here could be a death sentence. He moved toward a stand of dead trees he had marked months ago. Dead standing timber was best. Dry, seasoned, and ready to burn. As he worked, he remembered stories told by older trappers. Men who burned green wood and filled their shelters with smoke. Men who ran out of fuel midwinter and never woke up. Firewood was not just fuel, it was time. Each log meant more hours alive. He cut only what he could carry without sweating. Sweat was another silent killer. Wet clothes stole heat fast. Better to make many small trips than one hard one. By midday, he had stacked enough wood beside the shelter for several days. He dragged the last load inside and shut the door again. The fire welcomed him back. He ate slowly. Dried venison, hard but filling. Fat mattered in winter. It fed the fire inside his body. He melted snow for water in a small pot, starting with a bit of liquid at the bottom so he did not waste heat. Every trick saved wood. As the day wore on, the shelter grew comfortable. Not warm like a house back east, but warm enough to work without gloves. That was the goal. Comfort was dangerous. Warm enough to live, cold enough to stay alert. He repaired gear next. Snowshoes needed tightening. Rawhide stretched when wet and shrank when dry. If left unchecked, it could snap when needed most. He worked carefully, hands steady, mind focused. Keeping the hands busy kept the mind steady too. Isolation weighed on men in winter. Silence could break a man as surely as cold. Old trappers knew this. They told stories, sang, carved wood, talked to themselves if needed. Anything to keep the mind from turning inward too far. As evening approached, clouds gathered again on the horizon. Another storm, maybe smaller, maybe worse. The mountains never promised peace. They only allowed pauses. He checked the shelter one last time. Firewood stacked. Roof solid. Walls sealed. Vent near the roof opened just enough to let smoke escape, but not heat. Too little air, and a man would suffocate in his sleep. Too much, and the fire would fight the cold all night. He banked the fire carefully, arranging logs so they would burn slow and steady through the dark. Then he climbed back onto the sleeping platform, pulling the buffalo robes around him. Outside, the cold waited. Inside, knowledge held it back. Tomorrow would bring more work, more checking, more building. Survival in the mountains was never finished. It was earned again every single day. Night returned quietly, but the danger never left. The fire burned low and steady, just as it should. The shelter held its warmth, the logs creaking softly as temperatures outside dropped again. The man lay awake for a while, listening. In the mountains, silence was never empty. It was watchful. Sometime before dawn, the cold changed. It pressed harder, sharper. He felt it in his bones before he heard the wind rise again. Not a full blizzard, but enough to test everything he had built. He rose without panic. Panic belonged to dead men. The fire needed feeding. He moved smoothly, hands finding wood in the dark without searching. That was another rule. Never fumble at night. He added fuel carefully, watching flame return strength to the shelter. The stone hearth began to glow again, releasing stored heat like a slow breath. As light crept through the small window, he checked the ceiling. Dry. The repair had held. That small victory mattered more than most people could understand. By morning, the wind eased. He stepped outside and looked over the land. Snow glittered under a pale sky. The mountains stood tall and indifferent, as they always had. They did not reward effort. They only punished mistakes. He made his rounds again, checking roof angles, snow load, and walls. Everything stood firm. The shelter had done its job. But mountain men never trusted yesterday's success. They prepared for tomorrow's failure. Inside, he gathered smooth stones and placed them near the fire. By evening, they would be hot enough to wrap and hide and place near his bedding. If the fire weakened during the night, those stones could mean survival until morning. Backup plans were not optional here. Food was next. He checked his stores, counted days, adjusted portions. A man who ate too much early in winter starved late in winter. He had seen that too. Knowledge was not kind, but it was honest. As the day passed, he carved wood, repaired clothing, and spoke aloud from time to time just to hear a human voice. Loneliness killed men quietly. Those who survived learned to manage their minds as carefully as their fires. He thought of the others scattered across the Rockies, trappers alone in valleys, small family shelters half buried in snow, men and women depending on shelters built from dirt, logs, and hard-earned understanding. No rescue would come if those shelters failed. Only preparation stood between life and death. By evening, clouds rolled in again. Another storm would come, sooner or later. He added more wood to the stack and checked the door seal. First strips around the frame blocked drafts. The door fit tight, solid as a wall when closed. He sat by the fire and watched the flames dance. The shelter was not just a place to hide. It was a system. Site choice, log fit, roof angle, fire control, ventilation, insulation, and constant maintenance. Every part worked together. Remove one, and the whole thing failed. That was the real genius of the mountain men. Not strength, not bravery. Systems, knowledge refined through decades of loss and survival. Men who lived long enough learned to build shelters that could stand against month-long blizzards and hold life where none should exist. He lay down again as night fell, wrapped in buffalo robes, fire burning steady. Outside, the mountains waited. Inside, the shelter held. And that was how mountain men survived the deadliest winters on Earth. Not by fighting the cold, but by understanding it. Not by luck, but by learning what the mountains demanded and giving it exactly that.